Welcome. My name is Rachel Byrne, and I'm going to be doing a webinar on ADHD and the importance about it with students and how it is diagnosed and what it is. So let me just present my screen. So first I have the table of contents, a little overview of everything. So I have the title page, the table of contents, what ADHD is, the symptoms, the name of the test, and then we have the name of the need and an ADHD quiz to figure out if you have ADHD that you might want to know, and then how ADHD is diagnosed, and then some key takeaways from the video, and then a think to yourself kind of question that goes over about the importance of it, and then the content, more content from the research that I did about the topic, and then page 12 is administration procedures, and then page 13 goes more into depth, and then page 14 is details on getting tested, and then another page about administration procedures. And then we have page 16, which is the score report and data usage. So more research on the topic and how it is tested within students. And then the validity and reliability from the research that I did. And then a graph that shows all the research and results. And then conclusion. And then page 21 is citations. So let's get started. So what is ADHD? So first it is called attention deficient hyperactivity disorder. And basically it ranges from different symptoms for different students. And normally students are diagnosed when they're a child, so during elementary school, and then it normally lasts up to adulthood. And so normally when children are diagnosed with ADHD, they tend to be overly hyper, and so these students can't sit still in school. They normally have they can't control impulse behaviors, so they act out in class. And so one of the most common neural development disorders, it's one of the most common neural development disorders for children. And so the symptoms that students will start to show when like teachers start to notice these things, normally it's they talk excessively, they get in trouble, they have a lot of outbursts of answers before the questions have been completed. So you'll see this in school where children they'll just like outburst their answers, and they won't raise their hand at all. So it could look like that. And then so it also could be students are failed to finish schoolwork and chores because they can't sit still or finish a task, so they won't finish something before they start something new. And another thing is that they have trouble playing or doing leisure things like quietly, like so they're very talkative, they can't sit still. And then another thing is they are frequently lost, they lose things for tasks and activities. So this can look like students, they lose their materials, they lose their books, they lose a lot of things because they can't keep track of these things. And so like each symptom can range differently for how severe the ADHD is for a child. So I did some research on this topic, and so I found some names of exams that like students have taken in the past that the Stanford University CAPS ADHD assessment protocol tool. So like this was some of the research, and we'll get into more information about that. So the name of the need, ADHD is considered a neural development disorder. And so students, this is what they're diagnosed with. And so we'll get into more depth of what they need and how to control this disorder that they have. So I have provided a quiz for you guys to take, and it's just an ADHD quiz. It's kind of short, and it kind of just goes over a few things that like you can notice about yourself. And you can go ahead and click this, copy and paste this link, and quickly do the quiz to maybe see if you would be considered ADHD or maybe not. And so this also gives another idea of how ADHD might look with like the symptoms and stuff like that. So I added that. And so I have added a little video about how ADHD is diagnosed. So basically, it talks about how the disorder is not diagnosed by any test specifically, and it'll go into more details about that. And it talks about the psychiatrist that did a bunch of tests on students, and nothing, like, it didn't really show how a specific test will show that a student has ADHD. So we'll go ahead and watch that.
Parents often wonder, how can you get a diagnosis about whether or not a child has ADHD or doesn't? There is no one test that makes a determination, does a person have ADHD? There is no imaging picture that you can take of their brain. There is no blood test. There is no computer test. There's no electroencephalogram. This is not something which is determined by any one single test. What's really involved in learning about somebody enough to know if they have a diagnosis is a well-conducted interview of a mental health or medical professional who understands ADHD with the parents, with the child, also making use of information from school, if they're in school, and from other people who can tell us more about how this child is functioning in aspects of everyday life. It's usually a conversation, an interview, or possibly a series of a few interviews between the professional and the parents and the boy or girl to be able to learn more about what is daily life like for them and how does it compare with what you'd normally expect for somebody else in that age.
So we're not going to watch the whole video, but this kind of gives you an idea of how it is diagnosed. And later in the video, he starts to talk about that it could take up to, that it basically takes up to more than one conversation and more than one interview, but it could take up to multiple interviews. And it talks about how that being diagnosed with ADHD, it could stem from family members that couldn't been diagnosed from ADHD before, because it would have been like inherited with their family. So that is also another way that it could have been like they would have known that they might have it because that their family member might have had it in the past. So that's also another thing. And then so some key takeaways from the video. It talks about basically how there's no, like what I said, there's no one test that determines if a person has ADHD. And the interview, he asked about school and home to help determine how the kid is functioning compared to other kids their age. So he later talks to this one student that might have ADHD, and he talks about asking them multiple questions about how they're doing in school and how they're functioning at home. And so he went into details about that. And then, so think to yourself, like, as a future educator, what would you do as a teacher to help your student if they might have ADHD? So I like kind of thought about this and was like, this is why I love this topic, because we don't normally like talk about what we should be doing with our students if they have ADHD, or like how to handle it, because they might not be diagnosed with it yet. And so we are normally taught about how to lesson implement it in our lessons, but they never really teach us about how to do things with their, like how to handle this if we think our students might have ADHD. So I thought this was an awesome topic to talk about. So I went into research about ways that like people were diagnosed and some tests that were done on students. And so basically the publisher of this like research that I did was Stanford University's Vadin Health Affairs. and it was written in 2003, and the target population for this was college students that attend Stanford University. So basically, it provided a question checklist for students' behavior in either elementary, high school, or middle school, and it was basically a questionnaire that had 18 questions, and it was a symptom checklist that like you could go through and check to see if the student had diagnosed or that had ADHD. So then basically the procedures that it talked about was that it requires students to get tested, and the results they need to be sent, or it like the results need to be sent to the health affairs office. And so basically once a report has treatment attempts and student current medication, their documentation will not be considered a diagnostic. So to add on to this, the steps, like the checklist that the student needs to go through, is they need to get a consent to release information, the parent or childhood observer questionnaire, they need to have that. Then they need to have an adult observer questionnaire, a student self questionnaire, and then school records or academic testing reports. That all needs to be done. So they all need to have this done before they can move on to the next steps. And then, so it also said students may be referred to the Learning Center as the Children's Health Council for further assessment if necessary. So that doesn't need to be done, but that can be done if it is necessary. So then I go into another research topic, or I research another article, and this just goes into depth about what they talked about. So basically it said individuals are tested for persistent patterns of inattention or hyperactivity and impulsivity that interferes with functioning or development. So 9 questions were asked, and it was a questionnaire pertaining to hyperactivity disorder. And so the population target for this article was children, adolescents. So then here's more of some procedures for administration procedures that I talked about. So observe behavior of children over the nine courses a month. Visit your doctor to discuss observations. And then when you receive the checklist to complete, fill out thoroughly, and then return it to the children's doctor so that they can so that the healthcare provider can furthermore assessment diagnose, so that they can go through and be able to diagnose the student. So here in my it talks about, in my research that I did, it talks about the score report and data use. So let me find. So for this one, it talks about inattentive like ways that they would be diagnosed. And it says that children under the age of 17 are required to show 6 or more symptoms of inattention and 5 or more adolescents. So these symptoms must be present for 6 months as well. And then for hyperactivity impulsivity, if they have been diagnosed with this, the patient must show 6 or more symptoms for children up to 16 years of ages. So then it goes into the talk of how valid this article and test and assessment was. And so it showed that the correlation between the total ADHD RS and pilot ASR score was 0.84. So basically the coefficient alpha score ranged from 0.83 to 0.84. So it showed high internal consistency and high concurrent validity. And then so some more details about how reliable it was. It was proven reliable. Both the observer and self ASRS have been found to be feasible, reliable, and cost efficient. And so this next graph goes into breaking it down of the assessment. And so it goes into the school version and the home version. So I added all the data points on how short term it was, how long term, how reliable it was, and how consistent it was. And then notes going into all the that it showed throughout the whole thing. And then, so basically, a conclusion of everything, children are usually diagnosed with ADHD as kids. It is very, very important for teachers to diagnose their students as soon as they notice it so they don't fall behind in school. I know that I had ADHD in school and I would sit there tying my shoe while my teacher was doing a lesson, and I would always get in trouble for this. And I wasn't later diagnosed till later. One of my teachers said I should get diagnosed. And this made me fall behind a lot in school because I wouldn't pay attention. I would be sitting there not learning the stuff that other students were learning. So I would start to fall behind. And so there are many procedures to do to find out if your child has ADHD. And it's really important that teachers also are aware of these things so that they can make their students' parents like aware of these things. So it is very important as as a future educator to be aware of these things. And so basically that concludes with my whole presentation. I hope you guys learned something new. Here are my citations for everything that I found and all the research that I did for this topic. I think it's a very important topic because I could relate to this and I wasn't able to be helped till later on. So this was a very important and educational topic that I find very important. So thank you for listening.